All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us for this episode. I think it's going to be super valuable for paramedics and even EMTs that are considering PA school. I've got Mr. Brian Sanfilippo here in their PA program. He's going to tell us more about it. But I'm super excited to talk to him. I think he's going to have some valuable information and insight to what it looks like. And he's in the thick of it right now. He's graduating next December. So he's about to start clinicals and finishing up didactic, if I'm right. So yeah, let's talk to Brian and see if we can get some good perspective on if this is something that you want to consider. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
So the first thing I wanted to do was kind of like get your background and like hear how long you were an EMT and a paramedic, and kind of what your background is.
Educationally, I got my degree in biology at Colorado State University, graduated in 2006. After that, I went to paramedic school, realized that I wasn't ready for the streets, so I worked as an EMT for a year and a half, and then after that, I moved up to be a paramedic. I worked as a paramedic for the better part of 15 years in 3 different cities, Raleigh, North Carolina, Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Sioux Falls, South Dakota, primarily working in Colorado Springs as a paramedic. And that encompassed mostly 911 responses and some interfacility transport.
Okay. How long were you a paramedic when you kind of started considering the PA route?
I think I had been a paramedic for about maybe 3 or 4 years before I started considering looking seriously at what it takes to become a PA.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to ask you if you remember this one story. You and I were partners for, 6 months? We were partners for a substantial period of time as far as like partnerships go in Colorado Springs. Do you remember the transfer we did to like middle of nowhere, Arizona, and how we almost ran out of gas?
I remember it wasn't very like high acuity. I think he like either had a UTI or needed a new Foley or whatever. And then he needed ground transport back down to like Arizona, like the border of Arizona and New Mexico.
How long of a drive was it? Like 14 hours one way or something?
I think it was 13 or 14 hours one way because we drove down there. Well, you drove the whole way down. And then I think we did almost run out of gas at one point.
Well, I remember it was so long that they paid for a hotel for us before we came back. And I just remember being so tired in the morning that we just skipped the gas station. It was like, we'll get gas here in a couple hours. And then the stretch of road was like so long before the next gas station. I remember like putting the ambulance in neutral as we went down hills as if that would do anything.
Yeah, on the way back, we drove to Phoenix. We drove through Phoenix, and we were like, maybe we should get some gas. We don't know when the next gas station is. And we were in this, like, windy area of New Mexico, like, kind of rural New Mexico. And we were like, man, we're going to run out of gas. And it was like, the digital readout on miles to empty was, like, dangerously low before we got gas. It was, like, approaching single digits, man. It was, like, less than 20 miles, which those are never accurate. Like
they're probably high, if anything.
Right, like we probably didn't have, we were just moving on fumes.
Well, thank God we at least got gas and didn't die in the middle of New Mexico.
I know.
I wanted to ask you, how many other paramedics are in your class?
I'm the only paramedic, which
I was too.
That was interesting. I think there's one other person for sure who was an EMT, but I think she worked in a smaller rural type of more seemingly volunteer type of agency. Most of the people in my class had their healthcare hours through working as a CNA. But we also have like dietitians. We have scribes.
Yep.
We have what else? Pharmacy techs. Somebody worked in an ophthalmology office, and we had sitters. Somebody got their healthcare experience as a sitter.
Wow.
That was different, but I mean, whatever. I'm
Yeah.
not here to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I had no other paramedics in my class, and I think there was one or two EMTs. The EMT was actually from a busier system, like he had some experience and stuff. But yeah, no other paramedics, which was kind of odd, I feel like.
Yeah,
Because I feel
same
like it's
experience
kind
for
of
me.
a good progression from paramedic to PA, but
You know, it makes sense, right? With the history of the field, the career field, you would think that with that training and that experience, that it would translate well into the profession.
yeah.
Um, but I don't know for certain how obtainable it is when you work as a paramedic full time and trying to
Hmm.
make that work financially with going to school and
Oh, yeah,
obtaining
exactly.
all of the prerequisites necessary to get into PA school.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that I thought was weird was a lot of medicine or like medical fields have no idea what the difference between EMT and paramedic is either.
Oh,
So,
yeah. People still ask me in my
yeah,
class even. Yeah, it's kind
yeah.
of interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they don't, so I don't even know, like, when if you're a PA school, applicant reader and you're looking at applicants and you're like, oh, paramedic, EMT, probably makes no difference to you qualifications anyway, right? I mean,
I feel like there are some readers who kind of go through those applications who may not understand fully, but fortunately for me, one of the guys who works as a he works part time now, but he used to be full time here. He works at Yale now, but he was a paramedic for a considerable amount of time, and then he works in the ER now locally as a PA. And then another guy worked as an EMT first before
okay.
he went to become a PA. So I feel like they provided some valuable insight in the pre-hospital arena as to identifying what a paramedic and an EMT do for people.
Oh, that's nice. Okay. So when you were like getting ready for PA school, did you have an undergrad degree before you knew you wanted to go to PA school, or was that something you still had to obtain?
I have my bachelor's degree in biology. I minored in, at the time, it was anatomy and neurobiology. That minor doesn't exist anymore. I think it was turned into like biomedical sciences after I left. And really, there wasn't like an extreme focus on anatomy and neurobiology that you couldn't have gotten with a biology degree, right? I think most people get gross anatomy and biology. At least at Colorado State, where I went to school. But yeah, I had my 4-year degree before I went to paramedic school, and then
Okay.
at the time I had to start taking things pretty seriously. Like, you had to do some research, kind of see what had to be done, and figure out what an application actually looks like. I realized that I had to retake some classes, so I was current. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't think that my undergraduate GPA was competitive enough when I graduated from CSU.
Yeah.
So I wanted to improve that and demonstrate that I was capable of the rigor of master's level education.
Yeah. So you retook a lot of classes with some motivation just to increase your GPA, even if you kind of had those classes already done.
Yep. Most
Okay.
of the reason I went to and I attended University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. I think you might have been there a little bit at the same time I was there.
Yeah, I think because I would have finished my undergrad in 2016, 2015.
I don't remember the years, but I'm pretty
Yeah.
certain you were taking one of the chemistry classes around like maybe the year after I took it.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I was working on, so mine was, I didn't have my undergrad yet. I knew I wanted to go to PA school like when I was in paramedic school, I feel like. So around like 2011 is when I kind of started having those thoughts. And I was like, I went to an information session for Red Rocks in Denver. And like they present you with, here's all the requirements, here's what our average applicant looks like. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's impossible.
Yeah.
Like super, super daunting. Like people with better GPAs than me, way more schooling. And yeah, from like 2011 until I got in 2017 is when I started. I was just taking like 11 to 12 credit hours every semester, and I had to get my undergrad, which did take my paramedic credits at UCCS. I can't remember which degree I got specifically, but my paramedic at least counted for some credits, so that was nice. It was like allied health or something like that was the degree. But even after I got my bachelor's, I had to get like genetics and physics and all this stuff that like I never used in PA school, but was a requirement at some of these programs.
I do notice that. I feel like the prerequisites are very similar to medical school.
Yeah, like some of them I understand, like biochemistry. Yeah, biochem, I kind of get that one, but some of the other ones like genetics, physics, I just don't understand why you need that to succeed in PA school.
I honestly think that I could be wrong, and it's strictly my opinion, but I feel like it's a weed out type of prerequisite.
Sure.
Like what makes this applicant stronger than this other applicant? They're virtually the same. How do they do in the natural sciences? What's their challenging natural sciences GPA?
Yeah.
How does that compare to other people?
Yeah.
And I think it just gives them another thing to evaluate.
Yeah, that's probably true. Did you end up with a pretty high GPA?
When I went back to school, I think I got like 1 A minus. So I had like a 3.9.
Whoa, okay.
At UCCS. But my undergraduate GPA at Colorado State was a 3.0. It wasn't very good. It was just kind of like nothing to write home about. I never really thought it was that competitive, which is kind of why I felt like I had to retake some classes because and I felt challenged in my undergrad. It was hard, but I got my cumulative GPA up above 3.25, which I think is the minimum for some of these school programs. And, to be honest, I wasn't sure that I was going to get extended the offer to attend PA school. I applied 4 times, and there was 1 year where I interviewed at 3 schools and didn't get into any of them. So,
yeah. And that's a common story, though. I mean, some of my classmates, some of them applied for years and years to they would apply to dozens of schools every time. And then this was kind of like, they were like, this year, if I don't get accepted, I'm giving up on this, and they got into the program I got into. It's tough. It's so competitive. And you can't predict who's going to read your application. And
I did the same thing. I had so when I applied and interviewed 1 year, I think it was my second year, I interviewed at 3 schools. I interviewed at Duke, Emory, and Oregon. And I was like, okay, I've got a chance. These are really good programs. They all thought that I had something to offer. And I didn't interview well, and I didn't get in. And so I was really taken aback. I had to reassess my process and my application and my essays. And then I reapplied the next year and I got no interviews. So,
wow.
And I even applied to a lot of the same schools. And so that really put me down a path of thinking that I wasn't going to go to PA school. And I tried to make the best out of being a paramedic. I tried to assume a leadership role. I wanted to be an FTO. I wanted to be a supervisor. I ended up achieving some of that stuff, not necessarily in Colorado Springs. I was an FTO in Colorado Springs, but I was a supervisor in Sioux Falls for a short period. But and I grew from each of those experiences. Perhaps I needed to mature a little bit too. That's always important.
Yeah.
I eventually just decided that I couldn't do it forever. It breaks your body down, and you realize that if you're gonna achieve your career aspirations, you got to try. So I decided to try one more time, and the same thing, like you just shared. It was one of those hey, I know we've spent $25,000 on this effort to apply to PA school. We've committed years of retaking classes, and we've made trips even. Let's try one more time, and if we don't get it, then it's a wasted effort. It's a waste of money. I'll just be a paramedic. And then when I can't do that anymore, maybe I'll go teach paramedic school stuff. Right. That was kind of where I was headed. And I applied to 14 schools and I got into 2 of them, so, that was a huge surprise. And of course, one that I welcomed with quite a bit of excitement. And, here I am. And the thing, I think the rule is for me is you never know when the right person's going to see your application.
Yeah.
You're trying to show them that, I don't know if I benefited from like a COVID year or what, but I actually sought out some professional help in my application and interview for the first time for this application. Once I found out I was getting interviews, as the service of, like a specific PA interview to help prepare me for it, so that I went in there ready to go.
Well, it's a huge investment, so I mean, I can see why. That's one thing that when I talk to paramedics that are considering going to PA school, like, you can't be wishy-washy about it. Like, this isn't like, oh, maybe I'll go to PA school when I'm tired of being a paramedic, or, if they're wishy-washy about it, like, it's impossible. Like, you have to want this with everything. I mean, that's the only way I was able to, like, take so many classes while working full-time, was like being a PA was the end goal, and I wanted it with everything, and you sacrifice a lot. I mean, you sacrifice a ton of extra time and friendships and time with family, and we'll talk about that later. I mean, you're in a different city from your family. You're in a different state from your family, like, it's a huge sacrifice. So it's something that, you got to want with everything you got.
Yeah, it's interesting. You do hear stories about paramedics who feel that, hey, when I'm done, I'm just gonna go to paramedic school. It'll be fine. And they're kind of aloof about it, and you get this sense that, like, maybe they don't quite understand the commitment that is required. Because the people that you're applying with, I mean, they are very committed. They're sacrificing quite a bit, and they've got stellar GPAs. I mean, I have multiple master's degrees who are attending in my class. I have a guy who was a pharmacist for like 20 years, and my program, I mean, I don't know how your program is, but I mean, we've had doctors in there before, like, from different countries. Come in and go to PA school. So, like, the selection process is, I mean, I don't know how to put, I can't put a certain theme to it, how to make the perfect application, but I mean, it's certainly way more competitive than you think it is. And, just because you work with some PAs in the ER as a paramedic, doesn't necessarily mean that you have a full understanding of what's required to get in. And to be perfectly honest with you, there are still some days where I wonder how I got in. That imposter syndrome that they talk about, it goes away some. You get kind of numb to it because you just have to work so hard to make every week work, but it's still there a little bit.
Oh yeah, I totally felt that way when I was in school. Like, it's especially like some of my classmates that had applied so many times. I was like, I applied to Red Rocks twice. The first time, I knew I didn't have all the prereqs, but I wanted to be able to check that box that said, hey, this is the second time I'm applying the next year. So I applied twice, but that was still a pretty quick turnaround to get into PA school. I was like, how did this even happen? But I think I just had the right person that interviewed me that kind of saw where I was coming from and saw my potential, and the right person that read the applicant before that. And just, I mean, a lot of it is really about getting in front of the right person.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to present yourself appropriately, but the timing does definitely have to be right. I mean, and there is a little bit of luck, I think, too.
Yeah, for sure.